Great. I have Sheraz Ahmed here from Storm. Thank you for joining Drilling into Crypto.
My pleasure. Nice to see you, Ma.
Amazing. Uh, Shiraz, I'd like to ask you about yourself. I always like to start off by getting the guest to give us, a background on themselves and their journey and how they've entered into the space.
Yeah, sure, pleasure. So yeah, thanks for having me on the show. Been involved in the digital asset space now for the past 10 years. I guess before it was called digital asset, and it was just really crypto and kind of altcoin trading. I got involved in the early days at university, actually, personally, just through trading. And then I think caught the bug on the basis of a lot of the innovation that was happening in this industry. I'd say it was beyond the financial side of the innovation. I think when it comes to blockchain technology and it being, let's say, a relatively simple data management system that allows for a few components of transparency, immutability, decentralization. One of the key areas for me that was exciting was the tokenization of assets, and just the ability, for anyone, anywhere to own anything. And that was a bit of a pipe dream, I think, back in the day, but now it's becoming a bit more of a reality. However, I think we're still far from some of the hopes and dreams that were there back in the day. And yeah, looking forward to talking a little bit more about those in this show and understanding kind of how far we've come and are we going down the right direction or not, and what might happen in the future.
So, what was your core background before getting into the space?
Um, I'd say I've never had a specific specialty. When I studied at university, it was a Bachelor of Business Administration. It was general management. So we did a little bit of everything from accounting to finance to negotiation to business ethics to the financial markets. A lot of different different courses, and I guess that becomes I guess a bit of a specialty in itself, kind of having an understanding of all of those things and how they operate and work together,
Yeah.
which I believe has served me over the past 10 years in this industry, where there's so many different things going on. So you need to have at least a pinch of knowledge in a lot of different areas to be able to get by. So I'd say my area of expertise was much more on, let's say, the commercial business side of the world, or let's say then became more specific to this industry. And I started off trading, as I mentioned, and then later on in my career, it ended up being because I guess I speak English natively, and being in the Crypto Valley in Zug, where it was German predominantly. I got into the kind of communication side. It was like, oh, look, that guy speaks English. Let's have him do the comms and marketing. I think that side was always very interesting because of the way in which community operates and interacts and engages in our industry. And so I did really enjoy that part. And then it ended up flourishing more into kind of the business development side of things, the people side of the business, and then slightly into, let's say, investor relations and kind of the financial part around it as well, because of course that is an equally important part. So I'd say a business being a mix of marketing, finance, and BD.
Amazing. And what do you do now at Storm? What are you guys focused on?
Um, yeah, so I think over the past 10 years, a lot of things have changed. I do believe when it comes to the trust in the industry, we have gotten better at conveying what we are doing and why people should trust us, and that not every project is a rug pull or a scam, and that there are let's call them larger institutions that are advocating for us now. And so we don't just have to kind of shout and scream ourselves. There are larger microphones or kind of megaphones that are blasting the good word of digital assets. However, I think 5 years ago when I founded Storm Partners, one of the main reasons for doing so was that trust in our industry that was established to further trust was being degraded. It was very difficult to find people that could support you with your project, from marketing, from legal, from accounting, from really any perspective. When you look at entrepreneurship as a bit of a puzzle, there are always a lot of missing pieces, and filling those with a trusted party that can actually just do what they say they can do was really not easy in this industry. So Storm Partners was founded on the basis of supporting founders to fill those missing pieces in a trusted manner, with the USP of us having an understanding of how all of those pieces interact together, and so that we could help you find the right pieces and execute on the business tasks and topics that you needed to achieve the objectives that you had. And yet, due to the fact that, as I alluded to before, I was not necessarily, let's say, a technical person, the desire was to create a firm that had similarities to the McKinseys, the EYs, the big four of the world, where we could help provide solutions to challenges. And yeah, that's kind of where things started. The slogan is, we spark ideas to life. So we'd have, founders that also, I guess, were predominantly techie, that were really great at building technology, but weren't maybe so understanding of the scoping of, okay, well, I have this great, tech piece, an exchange, a wallet, a protocol, but how can I get people to actually start using this? How can I ensure that actually I stay out of jail for building this thing? Yeah. Because when you say KYC or AML to kind of a techie, they're like, okay, well, is that a programming language? And so it was it was quite an adventure at the beginning, kind of building up that trust. And yeah, now it's been 5 years, so quite a journey.
Yeah, so keeping crypto founders out of trouble is an important piece of what you do, for sure. And there's a lot of that. I think there's a big gap in the industry, especially an information gap for new founders that are coming in and that do not have a financial background or financial services background, accounting background, where you would be exposed to compliance and regulatory frameworks of that sort. And it's important that founders get the right guidance and mentorship to navigate through these global regulatory frameworks that are different from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Generally, they have these standard frameworks around the world that are generally acceptable, but from one jurisdiction to another, things change. And when you do have an amazing piece of technology and you're trying to build a user base, you can easily find yourself in trouble because you weren't aware of the compliance requirements of dealing with clients in different jurisdictions.
I mean, a very straightforward example there, right? Is that
I was going to ask you for an example.
Yeah, is that they're very one of the beauties, the dual-edged sword of the industry is that there are very little barriers to entry. On Pump.Fun, we could create a token in a few minutes, if not a few seconds. Yeah. But then there are implications to creating a certain asset, right? And one of the recurring themes that we had at a certain point was certain, let's call them degens, creating a token, launching it, and when you're maybe younger and a bit naive and you're just launching a token, maybe you don't even believe yourself it's going to be very successful. You're just like, look, let me just push this onto the market, and it's a bit of a joke. And some of these token launches did extremely well, right? So they raised capital, let's say they raised $100 million, right? Or yeah, say even less. Let's say 10 million, right? Which is more realistic. They raised 10 million, but they didn't have a company behind that. Okay, well, if you raise money and accept money as an individual, you're liable for personal income tax on that raise. However, you raised it in let's say ETH when ETH was at, let's say, 4K, and then ETH goes down to 2K, 1K, or whatever that might be, or you raise that money in a different digital asset, and then you end up not only having to pay the taxes on the amount and value that you receive the assets at, so you end up maybe even having a point where the let's say the asset that you have on your account is worth less than the tax that you are liable to pay, which can be an extreme liability towards the tax office, where like, well, I kind of did this thing, it was worth 10 million, and when I actually should have had a company and put it in there, etc., and I received this money, I decided not to sell it, and they're like, yeah, it doesn't matter, you still receive that money, you're liable for that amount. And then they can get into a lot of troubles. And so I think here in that kind of specific example, there's a lot of creativity in the industry, but sometimes people don't necessarily know what they're dealing with and what they're messing with. There are consequences, implications to their actions, and sometimes they're like, yeah, we'll figure it out when it comes, and sometimes it comes and it really hits quite hard. So there are a lot of younger and very successful founders that we work with, where we support them in navigating, let's say, the more traditional side of the world, to ensure that they can be creative with the protocols and the things that they are developing and the projects that they have, whilst knowing that they don't have to continuously look behind their back and be like, okay, but am I doing something that is going to put me in jail, or is it going to keep me indebted for life? And so that's something I think you're muted.
Yeah, I'm saying, especially with the institutionalization of the whole industry and the new criteria of investors and stakeholders and participants, you have no choice but to institutionalize your offerings, right? Even if you're offering retail services or products or tokens, but at some point, as a company, as a project, you're now up against, or not against, but you're in the midst of an institutionalization process within the industry, and that transformation is taking place, and it's imminent, right? Where institutions will pretty much own the majority of the industry, whether it's startups, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's the technology development. All that stuff is being run right now by the most prominent venture capitalists and private equity firms, and the likes of BlackRock and other that are entering the space quite aggressively. I'm yet to see like big tech, get involved in the tokenization angle of things. Yes, they have blockchains, and yes, they're involved, like whether it's Amazon or IBM, Hyperledger, all these other things that are there on the tech stack. But I haven't seen majors get into the tokenization stack, and I don't know how you see that from your perspective, in terms of we see that big consulting firms like the McKinseys of the world and KPMGs of the world are aggressively going after clients within the digital asset space, and we see that VCs, private equities, and institutional banking are pouring money into the space as well, whether it's on a startup level or even creating treasuries for specific tokens, right? But I haven't seen, or maybe it's not as obvious, big tech get into the token matters of business. How do you see that?
Yeah, I think it comes down to some of the core principles of the technology itself. Do those large organizations want to or need to be transparent about the transactions that they are making internally? transactions can be just units, let's say, of their supply chain. Do they really want people to know when they make a mistake on those things? Immutability. Do they really want to, once a data set or certain transaction is made, that they're not able to internally reverse that in their system or change their Excel sheet or whatever it is at a blink of an eye? And then, does decentralization benefit a centralized organization today, where certain decision-making processes from a governance standpoint, certain tech infrastructure that they operate and the likes? I mean, the tech side we could debate a bit more, because we've seen with Cloudflare and a few other, let's say, vulnerabilities that it's brought down, let's say, large centralized systems, which even, let's say, we're on Zoom today. Just last week on Friday, we wouldn't have been able to have this meeting, so we'd have had to look for an alternative. So I think there are certain areas where blockchain technology can help, but due to the fact that a lot of these enterprises or big tech, as you said, are inward facing, they don't maybe necessarily see that. When we look at, let's say, some other institutions where, let's say, the financial applications of blockchain technology, as you mentioned, there's more money going into it. They are looking at the application of blockchain technology from an external perspective, right? They are thinking to themselves, okay, well, if we are to replace like the traditional, let's say, cash rails that we have with blockchain technology, is it going to be more efficient for us to send money to parts of Africa, Asia, Americas, etc., with regards to money flows? And they are testing that, and they can see that it's working well, and it may be more efficient. To a certain extent, they're also following some of their consumer flows as well, because they have customers that have a preference or have started using those more frequently. So they're like, okay, we don't want to lose some of this total addressable market of the financial industry. So we need to lean in towards our consumer base as well, because we are losing them. And so I think that's why they're a bit more pushy towards that, or at least they have the desire to go more into that standpoint. I think where there is that middle ground is maybe some of those financial institutions like JP Morgan and a few others that have created their own tokens for initially internal use, for them to be able to track and see where some of their, let's say, interbanking kind of flows are and the likes. But they were always created and conceived with the ability or the desire to also open them out externally as well. And I think that comes with an underlying where JP Morgan and certain other banks are looking to become their own central banks in a way where they don't have to they don't have to abide by what the central bank is telling them with regards to certain capital requirements and certain let's say different frameworks that they have to follow, where they can, let's say, operate within their mini financial ecosystem themselves. And I think that could be a threat to what, let's say, some of the modern banking system has, where some of these giants are becoming, I don't know if too big to fail is the right way to say it, but they are trying to replace certain economies, which I think in the coming years may create tension, where today, even though a lot of the world's financial transactions, money flow is done with US dollars, and even, let's say, some of those like JPM coin and some of the others have, let's say, are pegged to the US dollar, USDT, USDC, etc. I think they're going to come under more and more scrutiny over the coming years for trying to bypass certain frameworks that, let's say, call it standard money today isn't able to do. Like I can't print more US dollars, but I can print more USDT without having the underlying USD. I can create more JPM coin or Storm coin or whatever it is without having the underlying. No one is checking me on that. And so I think there's going to be a nuance there, and I can see already the US starting to think about those those dynamics. Okay.
In those dynamics in terms of auditing the underlying peg, right, or what these these stable coins are being backed by in terms of basket of goods that these stable coins represent, right? There is probably a gap in the audit frameworks today for stable coins, which seem to be strengthening with recent regulatory frameworks around some jurisdictions. I know the UAE has issued its stablecoin laws. The US is aggressively moving towards that and have made some progress. Recently, USDT or Tether had some heat, from the market by their. I think it was I don't know which rating institution was S&P or Moody's. One of these rated Tether's USDT. Downgraded their rating, so they received some heat for that. But I guess the audit trail is very important, and having the blockchain to provide that efficiency is definitely something that financial services could find.
I think it's like a bit of a dual-edged sword, right? I mean, it can be extremely positive if it's used in the right way, but it can be extremely detrimental if put in the wrong hands in terms of if we're using blockchain technology, it's meant to be, transparent, decentralized, and all these things, great. But if you're using the technology and then you're obfuscating transactions, you have consensus on the network where you can actually move things around and it's not immutable. And actually your decentralized nodes are actually all controlled by you. Then you're kind of putting a cloak of good, a Trojan horse on something that is actually not positive for individuals. And we're seeing that in some economies where actually using blockchain technology, where actually you have the ability to see all of your citizens' transactions, and maybe you're like, I actually don't want my citizens to be buying a certain thing, or I'm going to create a quota and limit them from spending X amount of money on certain products, and oh, you know what, this person said something bad on social media. Let's freeze their account and starve them for 24 hours and see if they're going to say. I mean that's maybe an extreme case, but I do see there again. Blockchain technology is a tool, like a hammer. It can be used to build a house, as it can be to whack someone on the head. And we just need to understand that innately as a tool, it's neutral. It's not subjectively good or bad. It's in the hands of the user that it can become one of the other.
That's kind of the issue that Bitcoin, the Bitcoin community and Bitcoin maximalists have with crypto, right? And general blockchain, is that all these other coins, or the majority of these other tokens, whether it's centralized tokens or whether it's utility tokens or stable coins or whatnot, they're all centralized to a certain extent, and they all have that centralized governance frameworks that take away from the critical mission of what the blockchain or Bitcoin was built for, is to give that freedom and financial inclusion and the ability for people to choose their wealth, right? To have the freedom to choose their form of currency, their medium of exchange, their store of value, and their ability to build equitable communities and do cross-border payments without intermediaries, and be able to have that level of not freedom, but more like liberty, right? And I guess most of these tokens, whether it's JPM coin or other stable coins, whether or central bank digital currencies, at some point in time, they would, like you said, limit people's ability to have the freedom of choice on what to spend on, what to buy, how to live their life, what kind of lifestyles they're allowed to have or not allowed to have based on their status. And then, that just continues to kill the socio-economic construct of the world that's already flawed, could just become even more flawed because that equality of opportunity is being limited more and more by controlling currency more and more through these digital means. So I think it's very interesting, and I love your insights, honestly, from across the board on the consulting side, on the big tech adoption side, and on the socioeconomic side, and also the financial services side. But I want you to give us, if you had a minute to just give one message to the world of Web3 and builders specifically, what would it be?
It's a great question.
Take a few seconds. It's okay.
I
want
have to think
from the heart.
more than a minute to give you the minute. I'd say the inherent properties that Web3 brings to the world have a lot of quote unquote good within them. And if we look at a lot of the challenges that the physical and digital world are having today, I believe that blockchain technology, or at least the Web3 industry, is trying to provide a solution to that, where I don't necessarily see other industries doing so. I think some of them are going down a certain rabbit hole or have a narrow view on where the world will go. I think if you look at things such as digital inclusion, I mean, some of the most respected people on Twitter are monkeys or kittens or whatever it is. I mean, there is this, like, you can be anyone behind the computer as long as you're providing some form of meritocratic value in either the code base or what you're saying. It's very, let's say, purist from that standpoint. And I think a lot of the principles that we mentioned earlier related to blockchain technology, if they were established and brought into the way in which we look at digital experience today, it would allow for everyone to be, I think, more free in the way in which they operate their lives. It would allow builders to co-create in more lucrative manners, and to a certain extent, it would bring back, let's call it the meritocratic democracy that maybe we once had in the world. It's hard to say once had, because it's true that the world has always been dictated by the royals or the this, and it's never really had full, let's say, kind of a flat lined level of democracy. But I do think we are at a little bit of an existential crisis with certain larger powers that are going to have the ability to control a lot of our human behaviors, and that we are already being manipulated into making a lot of decision making, when we understand that there are only, let's say, a very few amount of people and companies that own a lot of all the other companies that we know today, and that there are a few companies that are making some of those decisions on like how the algorithms are reacting to the way in which we're doing certain things, etc. And we are, as let's say the general public, the masses, kind of bystanders to that, right? We're just kind of getting hit by it. And I think the Web3 industry is a way to kind of have a stand. And I don't want to say it's like to fight back, because I don't think there's necessarily like we don't necessarily want to be an opposing factor to it and create a fight here. But I think it's a great alternative for those people that believe in a future that is more free rather than one that is more controlled, where there's a perceived freedom, but actually we're only going to see a movie because an algorithm made us believe that influencers said that it was a great movie, and this rating agency said that it was well rated, but all of those things were actually controlled by the same party and interpaid, etc. So we start believing in the narrative that we're told to believe, and that seems like a narrative that's very similar to the Matrix. And it does feel like it is the direction that we're going in. And so, hopefully the silver lining to all of that can be this technology that can allow us to pop our head above the surface. So, yeah.
I love it. This is very well said, Shiraz. I appreciate those insights. And you hit a very sensitive spot, for me, because we share the same perception on life, and it seems so based on those beautiful last words you just mentioned. And I believe that we are living sort of a matrix style life, but I also believe that within the systemic framework that we live in globally, because we're whether we like it or not, globalization exists, and it's taken over our lives, and we all live predominantly online, which means we're all global. And at some point, something came along, such as Web3 technology, to allow that alternative to provide an inclusive, globalized life that everyone can participate in. And it rewards people who build and participate, and also punishes those who, in some way, shape, or form, who are not properly using the technology. And I think that's something that definitely builds an inclusive life. You can't escape the matrix. You have to learn the algorithm and know how to maneuver within it, and be able to, have that different perception, because everything at the end of the day is in your thought process and how you perceive life. So that said, thank you, Shiraz, for joining Drilling into Crypto. Hope to speak again soon, and let's keep building.
That was great. Thanks, Mo.